Imagine standing on the edge of a cliff, wind tearing at your uniform, the horizon blurred by mist, and the weight of hundreds of young lives pressing down on you. Imagine knowing that the moment you step forward, every decision you make could mean life or death, not just for yourself, but for every man who trusts you. That was the life of Dick Winters, a man whose quiet voice and steady hands would shape the fate of Easy Company during the most harrowing days of World War II. Dick Winters wasn't born a legend. He was born in 1918 in a small Pennsylvania town, the son of a farmer who instilled in him a sense of responsibility, but also a quiet humility. He wasn't loud, he wasn't brash, and he certainly didn't seek glory. Winters had a mind that measured things, weighed options, and considered consequences. Yet, in a world filled with chaos and bullets, his calmness would become his weapon. Picture him in the frozen training fields of Georgia, shivering under the weight of equipment that seemed almost too heavy for his young frame. Imagine the fear gnawing at his stomach as he watched men stumble, falter, and sometimes break. Yet he remained composed, steady, not because he wasn't afraid, because he chose to be more afraid of failing his men than of dying himself. He knew leadership wasn't about heroics. It was about responsibility. It was about making a decision when every choice could be your last, and then came D-Day, June the 6th, 1944. The sun barely peeking over the horizon, waves pounding against the shore, soldiers gripping rifles so tightly their knuckles turned white. Dick Winters stood on the deck of a landing craft, staring at Omaha Beach, knowing the orders he would give in the next hours could shape history. Imagine the mixture of terror and resolve, the human instinct screaming to survive versus the disciplined mind screaming to lead. But here's the question that haunts every great leader. When faced with impossible odds, when the world is screaming chaos, do you step forward or do you freeze, paralyzed by the enormity of the moment? Dick Winters didn't freeze. He stepped. And that decision would echo through the lives of men he didn't even know yet. Men who would follow him through the fire because they trusted him completely. Would you have found that courage if your life, and the lives of dozens of others, depended on it? Would you have become the calm in a storm no one else could survive? The mornings in Georgia were bone-chilling. Frost clung to the ground like a warning, and the men of Easy Company stumbled through the mud, boots heavy, hearts heavier. Dick Winters moved among them, his eyes scanning every stumble, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt. He wasn't just another officer barking orders. He was watching, learning, calculating. Every man's weakness, every moment of fear mattered, because in a few years, that fear would become reality. Training was relentless. Parachutes that refused to open, weapons that jammed at the worst possible moment, and the constant, gnawing pressure of knowing mistakes could be fatal. Winters was not the strongest, not the fastest, but he had something far rarer, an instinct to read people, to anticipate chaos, and to guide it into order. Imagine the nights he stayed awake, listening to the distant sounds of barracks settling, thinking about how to prepare men for a war they couldn't yet imagine. Every drill, every push-up, every forced march was a rehearsal for terror, and Winters took it seriously. And yet there were failures, small, painful, and humiliating. Men questioned him at first. A quiet officer from Pennsylvania, measuring words instead of raising his voice, leading men who had been taught to follow the loudest. Winters faltered too. The first jump, the first command given in panic, the first moment of hesitation, he felt the weight of imperfection. He questioned himself in the dark of the barracks, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had what it took to carry the lives of soldiers through hell. But the turning point wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. A single moment in a freezing drill when a soldier tripped on a ridge, mud sucking at his boots, and Winters was there, not with anger, not with orders, but with calm, precise guidance. He steadied the man, whispered a command, and together they finished the run. The men noticed. They began to trust the calm steadiness of a man who didn't need to shout to command respect. Imagine the shift, the quiet respect replacing doubt, a spark of loyalty lighting in the heart of men who would soon face artillery fire. The psychological weight of leadership began to settle on Winter's shoulders like armor. He realized courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to act despite it. And every failure, every freezing morning, every misstep in the mud was teaching him what history would demand. Imagine the young officer standing alone under a grey sky, listening to the wind whip through the pine trees, whispering promises of battles yet to come, knowing that one day he wouldn't just train men, he'd have to lead them across a beach into fire. And so the question lingered, heavy and insistent. Could he transform fear into strength? For himself and for every man who would follow him blindly? Could he carry them through a storm he could not yet see? The first test was coming, and it would change everything. The sky over Normandy was a grey, unforgiving canvas. Waves pounded the landing craft as it lurched toward the shore, tossing men like rag dolls, and the roar of artillery filled the air so completely that even your own thoughts felt drowned. Dick Winters gripped the side of the craft, knuckles white, heart hammering, not with fear for himself, but with fear for the men around him. These were boys in their late teens, barely old enough to shave, and yet their lives now depended entirely on the calm of one man who had never commanded under fire. The ramp dropped. Chaos erupted. Bullets tore through the air. Men screamed, fell, and sometimes vanished under the surf. Imagine stepping into a storm where every sense is assaulted, sand in your eyes, blood on your hands, the smell of gunpowder and fear hanging heavy, and knowing that if you hesitate for a second, dozens of lives are lost. Winters moved like a shadow through the chaos, small but unshakable, issuing commands that cut through the panic. Short, precise words. Actions over rhetoric. Men followed him not because they had to, but because his composure anchored them. And yet it was not without cost. He watched friends fall beside him, men he had trained, laughed with, argued with in the cold mornings of Georgia. One instant a man alive, the next gone, swallowed by the chaos. Imagine the grief that twists inside you, sharp and cold, a blade against your ribs while you keep moving forward. Winters didn't allow himself to stop. Every step was a decision. Forward, hold, cover. Forward, hold, cover. Survival wasn't instinct, it was discipline. The battlefield revealed what training alone could not. It stripped away illusions, burned away hesitation, and left only the raw bones of leadership. Clarity under pressure, calm amid terror, and the terrifying knowledge that one wrong order could mean death. Winters learned quickly that courage was contagious. His calmness gave others the strength to keep moving, to keep fighting, to keep breathing, when every fiber of their bodies screamed to give up. Imagine the weight of that responsibility pressing on your chest, so heavy it threatens to crush you, yet you bear it because no one else can. There were moments when doubt gnawed at him. Was he doing enough? Could he have saved the man who fell beside the dune? Could he have predicted the next shell? But in the chaos there was no room for paralysis. Every decision was immediate and every mistake had consequences. Winters discovered something almost sacred in that hellscape. Leadership was not about glory, it was about endurance, about guiding those around you through the impossible, keeping humanity alive in a place designed to strip it away. By the end of the day, when the smoke cleared and the beach was littered with the evidence of war, something had shifted. Dick Winters was no longer just a young officer from Pennsylvania. He had been baptized by fire. He had carried men through the storm, and in doing so, he had discovered a strength within himself that would define him for the rest of the war. And yet, the battle was far from over. The true test of courage, of strategy, and of humanity was still ahead. Night fell over Normandy like a velvet shroud, but there was no comfort in darkness. The beach was quiet now, but silence was deceptive. Every shadow could hide death. Every rustle of debris could signal another loss. Dick Winters sat alone for a moment, mud-streaked and exhausted, staring at the horizon. His body ached, his mind raced, and yet he couldn't stop thinking about the men he had led that day. Each name replayed in his head, each face, each life he had touched and failed to save. Imagine the crushing weight of responsibility pressing down, heavier than any artillery shell, heavier than the armor he would never wear. The psychological toll was immediate. Leadership in war is not a cloak of honor. It's a chain of relentless decisions, a series of moral calculations that gnaw at your soul. Winters felt it in the quiet moments, when no one could see. The boy from Pennsylvania, the quiet farm kid who measured every word, was now a man who had to make choices that could not be undone. Some nights he imagined what it would be like to just disappear, to let someone else shoulder the burden, but he couldn't. Not when lives depended on him. And then there were the small victories, the glimmers of humanity in a landscape designed to strip it away. A medic saved a wounded man because Winters had ordered proper coverage. A terrified soldier found courage when Winters spoke calmly, walking through the mud and blood to steady him. These moments were tiny, almost invisible, yet they mattered more than anything else. Imagine the relief, the fleeting spark of hope, the fragile human connection that made survival possible. Winters clung to those moments like oxygen, proof that even amid chaos, order and courage could persist. But losses cut deeper. He carried the memories of men who never made it to the end of the day, the ones who had laughed during training, shared stories, and placed their trust in him. Imagine the guilt, gnawing and relentless, whispering, "Could I have done more?" Winters learned quickly that leadership didn't absolve you of pain, it magnified it. Every decision, every command, every risk taken was a knife twisting in the gut, and yet the alternative, inaction, was unthinkable. Through these nights, Winters became more than a commander. He became a guardian, a compass in the storm. He began to understand that courage wasn't about never fearing. It was about absorbing fear and transforming it into action. Each man who survived under his guidance was a testament not to luck, but to his quiet, relentless presence. Imagine the silent promise he made to each of them, a promise he would keep no matter what, to lead, to protect, to endure. By the end of that first week, Winters had evolved. The boy who had wondered if he had the strength to carry men had found a core of steel he didn't know existed. But the real war, the one that would test his strategy, his nerve, and his morality, was only beginning. The calm moments were brief, and the storms were far from over. And, just over the horizon, a decision loomed that would define everything he had learned. The hills outside Carrington burned in the afternoon sun, smoke curling into the sky like sinister fingers. Dick Winters crouched behind shattered hedgerows, scanning the terrain with a practiced calm that belied the storm inside him. Enemy forces were entrenched, machine guns cutting the fields in front of him, and men he had trained, men he had come to know as brothers, were pinned down, terrified, and waiting for a miracle. The kind of miracle that only a decision could create. And then it hit him. There was a path, a narrow, almost impossible approach that could bypass the German defenses, but it was dangerous, exposed, the kind of risk that could wipe out half of Easy Company in seconds. Every instinct screamed caution, retreat, live to fight another day. But Winter's mind didn't linger. He saw the men, their eyes wide with fear, their faith in him absolute. And in that moment he realized leadership was not about following the rules. It was about creating the rules that could save lives. Imagine the internal struggle, the calculation of odds, the rapid mental map of every bullet, every ridge, every enemy soldier. He took a breath, steady and deliberate, the kind that seemed to slow the world around him. Then he gave the order. Forward, a maneuver so daring it bordered on recklessness. And yet it was executed with surgical precision. Winters led from the front, moving like a ghost through the hedgerows, signalling, directing, inspiring, carrying not only weapons, but hope. The firefight that followed was relentless. Bullets ripped through air and wood alike, men screamed. Explosions shook the ground like the earth itself was angry. Winters moved steadily, unwavering, absorbing every ounce of chaos and transforming it into momentum. He risked everything, his life, the lives of his men, the mission itself, for a chance to break the enemy's hold. Imagine the weight of every step, every gesture, every command, knowing that one miscalculation would mean death. Not abstract death. Real, immediate, screaming death. And yet, amidst the terror, there was clarity. Winter's leadership transformed fear into focus. Soldiers rallied behind him, moving as one, pushing forward when every instinct screamed to duck and hide. By the end of the day, they had captured the objective, a feat so improbable that even the men themselves couldn't believe it. Easy Company had survived, not by luck, not by chance, but because one man had the courage to gamble everything on a single, audacious decision. Imagine the exhaustion afterward, the adrenaline fading, leaving raw, ragged awareness. Winters sat surveying the battlefield, the cost written in the mud, the blood, the silence between the sounds of distant gunfire. But there was triumph too, a hard, bitter, unspoken triumph that came from knowing he had chosen courage over safety, leadership over fear. In that moment, Dick Winters became more than a soldier. He became a legend, forged in the crucible of risk, a man who could carry not just his own life, but the fate of dozens of others with him, and yet, even in victory, the question lingered. Could courage alone carry them through the next storm? The war had only begun, the battlefield went silent, but silence was never peace. Dick Winters walked among the men, each step heavy with the weight of what they had survived, and what they hadn't. The sun was low now, casting long shadows across the bloodied earth, and for a moment the horror of what had just happened hit him. Faces etched with fear, exhaustion, and grief stared back at him, silently asking the same question he was asking himself. How do we keep going? How do we survive another day like this? The aftermath of that bold maneuver left more than physical scars. Men carried grief in their eyes and a quiet tension in their movements. Winters saw it in every stagger, every flinch at a distant sound, every pause before obeying a command. The battlefield didn't forgive, and it didn't forget. Imagine the internal storm he fought as he tried to comfort those under his command while battling his own swirling guilt and exhaustion. He had saved lives, yes, but he had also made the decisions that had ended others. Every command was a coin flip between survival and death. Yet, in the midst of this grief, something remarkable began to emerge. Winter's men began to trust his judgment implicitly. They moved not out of blind obedience, but because they had seen him act under fire, calm when everything screamed chaos, deliberate when panic threatened to swallow them whole. He became the anchor, the fixed point, in a world unraveling at the seams. Imagine the subtle power of quiet confidence, the way a single steady figure can transform terror into determination. That is what Winters had become, and Winters himself had changed. The war had stripped away the boy from Pennsylvania. In his place stood a man forged in relentless challenge, a man who understood that leadership meant carrying the weight of life and death decisions without complaint. The battlefield had taught him painfully and repeatedly that courage wasn't flashy, it wasn't about recognition. Courage was endurance. Courage was the silent decision to keep moving forward when every part of you wanted to collapse. There were small victories amid the losses. A soldier who had frozen on D-Day, now took initiative under fire. A medic moved more decisively, saving multiple lives. Winters watched and felt a flicker of pride. Leadership wasn't just about commands, it was about teaching men to believe in themselves through your example. He realized that his greatest weapon wasn't strategy or training or even courage. It was trust. Trust that he had earned, and trust that would carry them through the horrors yet to come. And still the war pressed on, relentless and unforgiving. Each battle demanded more than physical skill. It demanded mental fortitude, emotional resilience, and the ability to carry unimaginable responsibility. Winters had proven he could face the storm, but could he keep his men alive through the next one? Could he maintain the delicate balance between fear and hope, chaos and order? The answer would soon be tested again, in ways far more harrowing than any training exercise or tactical gamble. The battlefield whispered its next challenge, and Winters knew that what had just been survived was only the beginning of the crucible. The war didn't pause. Every morning brought new orders, new dangers, and new faces among the men of Easy Company. But something had shifted. Dick Winters no longer just reacted to chaos. He anticipated it. Every ridge, every hedgerow, every village became part of a mental map, a chessboard where lives and bullets moved in tandem. He had learned the brutal truth. Strategy mattered, but mindset mattered more. Imagine standing there, boots caked in mud, sweat stinging your eyes, and knowing that your calm, measured brain could be the difference between survival and death. That was Winters' reality. He began to see leadership as a psychological craft. He noticed the small cracks in his men's confidence and strengthened them. A whispered word here, a hand on a shoulder there, a steady presence that conveyed, without exaggeration, that they could survive what was coming. It wasn't heroics, it was human engineering, the ability to cultivate resilience in the souls of men who were staring down annihilation. Imagine the subtle power of trust, of shared resolve, of teaching courage not by orders, but by example. Winters became the invisible hand guiding them through hell. The breakthrough came in subtle ways. A squad that had panicked under fire now moved with quiet precision. A younger officer learned to anticipate enemy movements because Winters had shown him, without speaking, the importance of calm observation. Even in exhaustion, even after loss, even when the earth beneath them seemed to demand surrender, his men learned to endure. Winters' leadership was no longer just a force, it was a contagion. Fear still existed, but it had a shape now, a direction. It could be harnessed. It could be survived, and Winters himself continued to evolve. He felt the weight of every decision, every casualty, yet he also found clarity in the discipline he had honed. The battlefield taught him that leadership was about emotional balance, absorbing the shock, the grief, the fear, and transforming it into action that inspired others. Imagine moving through smoke and fire, bullets whipping past, knowing that if you break, the men who look to you break too, and yet holding that line, feeling the strange satisfaction of a mission accomplished despite the chaos. That was his rhythm. That was his essence. By the time Easy Company had survived Carrington, the hedgerows and countless skirmishes, Winters' reputation had grown, not through bravado, but through the quiet precision of his mind and the consistency of his courage. Men would follow him anywhere, not because he was fearless, but because he showed them that courage could be measured, taught, and embodied. Every decision, every risk, every moment of fear transformed into clarity made him more than a commander. He became a symbol of what disciplined human leadership could achieve in the most unforgiving circumstances, and yet, for all his mastery, Winters never lost his humanity. He laughed with his men when he could, mourned quietly when he had to, and always carried the unspoken burden of every life entrusted to him. Imagine that, leading hundreds of men through hell, carrying their lives, their fears, and their hopes, and doing it with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that true courage is as much about endurance as it is about action. The war still raged, but Dick Winters had become more than a soldier. He was the anchor, the strategist, the steady heart in a world consumed by fire, and in that he left a legacy far beyond the battlefield. Years later, Dick Winters would return home, not as a celebrated hero in the eyes of the world, but as a quiet man carrying the invisible weight of every decision, every life, every loss. Imagine him sitting alone in a small Pennsylvania home, medals resting on a shelf, photographs of young men who never made it beside him, and the memories of war folding into his thoughts like a silent tide. The battles were over, but the echoes remained. Long after the guns fell silent, the lessons, the pain, and the courage lingered. He never sought fame. He never wanted it. But those who knew him, the men of easy company, understood something profound. Courage isn't about accolades or recognition. Courage is quiet. It's steady. It's the ability to carry yourself with clarity when everything around you collapses. Winter's life became a testament to that kind of leadership. Imagine the subtle power of someone whose strength wasn't in raising his voice, but in raising others, teaching them, protecting them, guiding them through moments when ordinary men would crumble. That is a power far more enduring than medals or headlines. His story reminds us that leadership and courage are not born, they are forged. Forged in the cold mornings of relentless training, in the fire of impossible battles, and in the quiet moments of reflection that follow each triumph and failure. Winter's genius was not only in tactics or strategy, but in understanding the human heart, that fear, trust, loyalty, and resolve are intertwined, and that a single, steady hand can turn chaos into survival. Imagine the thousands of moments where one decision, one word, one gesture determined the fate of men who looked to him for guidance. Every one of those moments became a thread in the fabric of history. And that brings us to the question that lingers long after the story ends. If life tested you like it tested him, would you have kept fighting? Would you have had the patience, the courage, and the clarity to lead under pressure when every instinct screamed for retreat? Dick Winters showed us that the answer isn't about perfection. It's about endurance, presence, and the quiet, unwavering choice to act for something greater than yourself. His legacy is more than a tale of war. It is a blueprint for life. In moments of fear, uncertainty, and challenge, the question isn't whether you will survive, but whether you will lead, whether you will act, whether you will carry those who trust you through the storm. Dick Winters carried men through hell and emerged not just as a commander, but as a teacher of courage, a quiet hero whose lessons transcend the battlefield. So, tell me in the comments, if you were in his boots, could you have done it? Could you have stood firm while the world burned around you? Could you have been the calm, the anchor, the hope for everyone relying on you? Because the real measure of courage, the kind that defines a life, isn't on a battlefield. It's in every choice you make when fear and responsibility collide.